The next thing we're going to take a look at is subtracting integers. Okay, and subtracting subtraction is a process that is the opposite of addition. Okay, so it's exactly an opposition. If we were to add a number and then subtract the same number, we'd be left with nothing, right? So adding and subtracting are exactly the opposite, and so they kind of balance each other out when it comes to working through numbers. Now, negatives are the opposite of positives. Therefore, when we're subtracting an integer, subtracting integer is the same as adding the opposite integer. Okay, it's the same as adding the opposite integer. So now we have to remember that in addition, order does not matter. If we add forwards or backwards, we're going to get the exact same answer because we're just putting two values together. Now, with subtraction, order does matter. And it's very important that we always work from left to right. Okay? The first number, subtract the second number. Okay? If we do it in the opposite way, we may get a same number, we may not, depending on if we're using positives and negatives, but we're going to end up getting the wrong answer no matter what. So let's follow these steps, and now we're going to use some ones that should be fairly straightforward to see to start, and then we're going to kind of get into a little bit more complicated ones later on. So let's complete the following expression. We have 6 minus 4. 6 minus 4 can be rewritten as 6 plus negative 4. Okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to change the subtraction to an addition, which we just did here, and then we're going to convert the second value to the opposite integer. So we're subtracting 4. It's the same as adding a negative 4. This is positive, that's negative. Okay? Now we complete the expression using the tools of addition. So if we look at this one here, 6 plus negative 4, 4 negatives are going to cancel out 4 of them here, but because the 6 is bigger, we're going to be left with positive 2. Now, you would recognize that exactly the same in a regular statement, so you can see that when we add the opposite, we actually get the same value. So in a question like here, 10 minus 3, we know that that is 7, but if we rewrite it as 10 plus negative 3, 3 of those 10 are going to be canceled out, which brings us down to 7. Okay? Brings us down to 7. If we have 5 minus 9, and we're going to rewrite this as 5 plus negative 9, we'll notice the negative is bigger, and so we're canceling out 5 of these negatives, and we're left with just negative 4. Okay? 5 minus 9 is, in fact, negative 4. And if you're not totally sure, you can use your calculator to try this out as well, just as a little bit of practice. I don't want you using your calculator all the time, but as a little bit of practice, if you do 5 minus 9, you're getting negative 4, which is exactly what we saw in our statement there. Okay. Now, we'll do one more here, and then it gets a little bit more complicated. But if we do negative 5 minus 4, this is the same as negative 5 plus negative 4. Okay? We're going down another 4. We're adding more negatives. That's really what subtracting means. We're adding negatives, or at least if we're subtracting positives. So we're just adding some more negatives. So we're going from negative 5 and we're going down all the way to negative 9 because now we have 9 negatives that we're adding together. So think of subtracting integers as the opposite of addition. We're just adding the negative. Now what happens when we subtract a negative? Well, now when we're subtracting negative, this is where some students get really confused, and I understand that as well. But if we follow add the opposite, okay, just like we did here, we added a negative, this one here is 12 plus 7. Okay, we're doing the opposite. We're subtracting negatives. We're trying to get rid of negatives, which actually gives us positives. And this will, in fact, be 19, okay, because we're adding the opposite. Okay, and that's the process that we have to see it as. We're adding the opposite. Now negative 2 minus negative 7, this will be negative 2 plus positive 7. Okay, we're adding 7 to it. If we're subtracting a negative, we're getting rid of negatives, and that's what we have to see it as. We're getting rid of negatives, which is the same as adding positives. It's actually the same thing. 2 negatives and 7 positives mean that we're going to have 5 positives. Okay, we have 5 positives, and so that's what we're gonna come up with through that statement. Final one here, we have negative 9 minus negative 3, so we're adding 3, okay? Now we're adding 3, which means that we're not actually going to get all the way to 0. The negative is still bigger, so we're still going to be left with 6 negatives, but we've actually gone up. We've made it better. We've improved. We've added some positives through this process. So the important thing to remember is that we are adding the opposite, okay? Now the opposite is just either negative or positive. Whatever we don't have, we're adding that on. Now there's a few questions I'd like you to do, 3 to 5. Numbers 3 and 4 are dealing just with subtraction, and then 5 deals with adding and subtracting in the same statement. Remember, work left to right and continue on. We'll get to order of operations a little bit later on in quite a few lessons yet. But start with these 3 here, okay, and work on those for subtraction.